So you want to get to Legend in Hearthstone, do you? Well, to do that, you're going to need to win some games. And to do that, you're going to need a win condition. Well, what's up folks, FalconePunch 55 here once again, and today we are going to talk about Hearthstone, but more specifically, winning in Hearthstone. And how to do that. I'm actually going to talk very specifically about the current competitive decks and what their win conditions are. See, decks in Hearthstone, like most other card games, actually have one specific win condition. In some decks, such as Freeze Mage, it's quite obvious. You save up all the burn spells and then blast them in your opponent's face to win the game. But in other decks, like Malygos Druid, it's a little more complicated than that. Different ways in which you can win Hearthstone can mostly be categorized into burst damage, fatigue and attrition, and beatdown. These types of decks are probably better known to you guys as combo, control, midrange, and aggro. So let's look at the decks that currently make up the Hearthstone metagame, and starting with control, we'll talk about the obvious, Control Warrior. Control Warrior allows you to keep control of the board with super cheap spells such as Execute and Shield Slam. The win condition for this deck is super simple. Survive, attrition, fatigue, until the late game and then outlive your opponent. That is the win condition. That is the basic plan for how you're going to win every single game, relying on the Golden Monkey to ensure that you do win the late game. And of course you've got Grommash, which is usually just a 2-for-1 removal card, but can give you burst damage to win the game if you get lucky. But Grommash is by no means the deck's main win condition, just like Malygos isn't in Druid. We'll get to that later. The Control Warrior mirror match is a whole other story entirely, and one of the most entertaining for me and boring for other people matchups in the game. Actually a lot of skill to it though, playing Sylvanas in such a way where you won't just end up stealing your opponent's Acolyte of Pain. I've seen games where Control Warriors actually play Sylvanas and then Shield Slam it without stealing anything, and it's actually been the correct play. That's another video. N'Zoth Control Warrior is this new kind of twist on the Control Warrior deck that's been making the rounds recently. And it does have N'Zoth as sort of an extra backup win condition in the same way that Grommash is in regular Control Warrior. It doesn't change the main point of the deck though, being just survive, outlive your opponent. That is Control Warrior's win condition. It's important to keep note of win conditions when playing the game, because if you're playing Control Warrior but playing really aggressively and trying to beat your opponent down by creating a big board, you're probably just going to lose most of your games. Murloc Paladin is really the only other control deck currently in the meta, and it's similar to Control Warrior in that you need to survive until it's combo time. Now, combo is kind of a dodgy word to call, anything can happen, but it essentially works in a similar way to Freeze Mage does. You wait until you can play it, and then you've got this finite amount of damage that you can deal and hopefully win the game with. And yes, Tyrion, True Silver Champion, etc, are in the deck. There are methods to beat down your opponent, but that is by no means the win condition for this deck. Top priority is almost always, depending on the matchup, survive, play, anything can happen. Next we'll talk about the only other real combo deck in the meta at the moment, and that's Questing Adventurer Rogue. Now this is interesting. It's very hard to actually put your finger on what exactly the win condition is, but what you can say is that it's playing a lot of spells in quick succession after Gadgetzan Auctioneer, after Questing Adventurer, or before Edwin Van Cleef. You use these cards to build up as big a board as possible, stealth your guys, and then hit your opponent in the face. So in that respect, yes, this is very much a combo deck. Some players also run Leroy Jenkins in the deck, which makes it a little bit more clear what style of deck this is, but at the end of the day, you're not planning on winning this by playing Tomb Pillagers and beating down your opponent's face. You're very much planning on winning this with Van Cleef or Questing Adventurer. Next we'll talk about Midrange Hunter, Shaman, and Dragon Warrior. All super simple to explain. You just curve out perfectly and win the game by beating down your opponent. And yes, each of these decks does run its sort of big daddy of cards, which is kind of their win condition. But again, these cards themselves are not the main win condition. In fact, these decks can win without even drawing their win condition in that respect. Their real win condition is to beat down your opponent. Also known as mid-range decks, The key to winning with these are often curve out as well as you possibly can and know when to make the transition from trading into hitting the face. Again, that's another video in itself. There's a lot to talk about there, but making that transition typically resolves around working out whether in any current situation you're the beatdown deck or you're the control deck, because in every matchup, even mirror matchups, one deck is always playing control, one deck is always playing beatdown. Well, almost always. But that's your win condition. Know when to trade, know when to hit the face, curve out perfectly, win the game. Finally, we'll talk about what I think is actually the most complicated deck in the meta to put into a win condition category, and that is actually Mali Druid, Token Druid, Yogg Druid, Ancient of War Druid, whatever you want to call it, or whichever version you're running. Yogg-Saron isn't exactly a win condition, it's more of a comeback mechanic. Your win condition in this deck really is curve out as well as you can, play tokens, maybe Ancient of Wars depending on which build, and just get dealing as much damage as possible. In many respects, this is just a mid-range deck. And yes, I'd be remiss not to mention that Malygos is in this deck, and it too is a bonus win condition, but like Ramesh, I would not call this anything other than a bonus win condition. It's only going to be winning you the game some of the time. In all of the Hearthstone games I've seen recently, I've very, very rarely actually seen this card win the game. It usually comes down to just pressuring your opponent down and winning with Feral Rages and Swipes, and maybe even Yogg-Saron. Malygos is just there as a bonus, and particularly good against more control-y style decks. So it's a beatdown deck with an element of combo. Sort of like Tempo Mage with Antonidas, beatdown with spells and minions, combo Antonidas and Kabbalist Tomes are there if you need them. Okay, so it's all much more complicated than I originally made it sound, but as I have hopefully clearly explained, each deck does have one specific win condition that it relies on 90% of the time. And of course, some of them have backup win conditions. Sometimes you'll win in really bizarre ways if the opportunity comes up, and often it does depend on the specific matchup that you're currently playing. Hearthstone is a game that always encourages versatility, and one of the ways in which you can help yourself win every game is by asking yourself every single turn before you make your move, what is my win condition this game? How do I win from here? Sometimes the best move is counterintuitive, and if you make the move that means you definitely survive, you might lose your win condition. So every turn, play the best move you can to make sure that you win the game, and don't think any more than that. Thank you for watching as usual. Make sure you subscribe if you liked the video, hit the like button if you liked it, and go and check out Hearthhead on Twitter, Facebook, and of course the big website itself. Thank you for watching. I will catch you again next week.